He looked me right in the eye and said the words no mother-in-law ever expects to hear. "You're irrelevant." It stung, like a slap I never saw coming. After all the years I'd spent holding this family together, suddenly I was being treated as though I no longer mattered. Tell me, have you ever been told you were no longer needed, only to find out that in the end, you were the one holding the key all along? Drop your story in the comments. Now, let's get straight into today's tale. It started on an ordinary afternoon. I was in the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air, when my daughter and her husband came by. At first, it was casual. Small talk about the weather, work, and their busy schedules. But then, the conversation shifted. My son-in-law leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You know," he said, "times have changed. People your age, well, you're kind of irrelevant now. The world moves too fast." The words landed heavy. My daughter's face flushed, and she tried to hush him. But he just shrugged as if it were a harmless joke. I sat there stunned. Me, irrelevant? I wanted to remind him of the years I had worked, the bills I had paid, the nights I had stayed awake nursing sick children, the sacrifices I had made to keep the family afloat. But instead I stayed quiet, sipping my coffee slowly, letting his arrogance fill the silence. Inside, though, a storm brewed. It wasn't just the insult. It was the dismissal, the idea that my life, my contributions, no longer held weight because of my age. That night, alone in my room, I thought about those words. "You're irrelevant." They echoed like a cruel refrain. For a moment, I almost believed them. But then I remembered something important. I still held power. Not loud, flashy power, but quiet, steady power. The kind that comes from years of careful work, careful planning, careful choices. And in the back of my mind, I thought, one day, he'll learn. That day came sooner than I expected. Just a few weeks later, my daughter called in a rush. Her husband had been offered an opportunity, something big, something that could change their future. But there was a catch. To move forward, they needed a document signed, a document that required my approval. I listened calmly as she explained, her voice tinged with worry. "Mom, we can't do this without you. Your signature is the last one they need." I almost laughed. The irony was too rich. Not long ago, I'd been dismissed as irrelevant. And now, suddenly, I was the only person who could move their grand plans forward. When I hung up the phone, I sat quietly for a long time. This was my moment. Not to gloat, not to lash out, but to remind all of them, that I was far from irrelevant. I folded my hands and whispered to myself, now we'll see who really holds the power. It was a Thursday evening when they showed up at my door. My daughter looked nervous, clutching her purse tightly, while her husband carried a folder under his arm. He was dressed neatly, hair slicked back, a smile plastered across his face. "Margaret," he said, his voice unusually polite, "we've got some paperwork we'd love your help with." I invited them in, offering coffee as usual. My daughter accepted gratefully, but my son-in-law waved it off, already pulling the folder open on the table. "These are just formalities," he said breezily. "We need your signature here, here, and here. Nothing complicated, just a small step so we can move things forward." I looked at the papers. They weren't small. They were legal documents tied to property, investments, things I had worked hard for. My name was there in bold print, the final signature needed to complete the process. I glanced up at him. "So you need my approval?" He nodded quickly. "Yes, but don't worry, it's just a formality." Something in the way he said it, just a formality, made my chest tighten. Just weeks ago, I had been called irrelevant. Now suddenly, I was the center of everything. I folded my hands slowly, leaning back in my chair. "Funny," I said quietly, "how irrelevant people usually aren't asked for their signatures." The smile faltered on his face, just for a second. He cleared his throat. "I didn't mean it like that. You know how people talk. I was just joking." But his eyes told a different story. Arrogance doesn't vanish overnight. It hides when it's cornered. My daughter jumped in quickly. "Mom, please. This is really important for us. We can't move forward without you." I looked at her, my daughter who I loved with all my heart, and I softened a little. But I also knew this wasn't just about helping them. This was about respect, about dignity, about proving that my voice, my decisions, still mattered. So I didn't rush. I read every page carefully, tracing the lines with my finger, letting the silence stretch. My son-in-law shifted in his chair, impatient, tapping his pen against the table. Finally, I looked up. "You said it was nothing complicated, but it seems pretty complicated to me. Why don't you explain it, every detail, so I understand exactly what I'd be signing?" He blinked, caught off guard. "Well, it's just business. You don't need to worry about the details." I raised an eyebrow. "If you expect my signature, then I expect clarity. Start explaining." The confidence in his voice wavered as he stumbled through the terms. The more he talked, the clearer it became. He had underestimated me. He thought I'd nod along, sign blindly, and let him take control. But the more he fumbled, the calmer I felt. For years he had dismissed me, made me feel small. Now, with every stammer and hesitation, I saw his arrogance shrinking. When he finished, I closed the folder gently. "I'll think about it," I said. "This isn't something to rush. You'll have my answer when I'm ready." His mouth opened, then shut again. He wanted to push, to demand, but he couldn't. Because in that moment, he knew the truth. The power wasn't in his folder. It was in my pen, and I wasn't going to let him forget it. The next few days were quiet, too quiet. I knew he wouldn't let it go. Men like my son-in-law never do. When arrogance is bruised, it doesn't heal easily. It festers until desperation sets in. Sure enough, by Saturday afternoon, he was back. This time, without my daughter. He stood at my door, folder in hand, smile stretched too wide. "Margaret," he began, his tone syrupy sweet. "I thought maybe we could go over those papers again. I realize I didn't explain them very well before." I let him in, motioning toward the table. He spread the papers out like a salesman, his words tumbling faster than before. He talked about opportunity, about growth, about how everyone would benefit. His hands moved in wide gestures, his voice dripping with charm. But beneath the polished words, I heard something else. Fear. He needed me. He needed my signature, and without it, everything he had planned was stuck. I sipped my tea slowly, watching him dance around the truth. "You make it sound wonderful," I said evenly, "but forgive me if I'm cautious. I've worked too hard to sign anything without certainty." His smile faltered, then returned, a little tighter. Of course. I just want to make things easier for everyone. You'd hardly have to do anything. Just one signature and boom, it's done." I leaned forward slightly. "If it's so small, why does it seem to mean so much to you?" He hesitated, just a flicker, but it was enough. His voice dropped. "Because it's important. This deal, this opportunity, depends on it. Without your approval, the whole thing collapses." There it was, the truth. I let the silence stretch, letting him sit in it. Finally, I said, "Interesting. You once told me I was irrelevant. Yet here you are, unable to move forward without me." The mask slipped for just a moment. His jaw tightened. His eyes narrowed. He wanted to snap back, but he caught himself, forcing another smile. "I didn't mean it, Margaret. I was out of line. I see now how important you are. Really, I do." I set my teacup down. Words are easy. Respect is harder. You don't get it by demanding. You earn it. He shifted in his seat, clearly unused to being spoken to this way. For once, he wasn't the one holding the upper hand. "Look," he said finally, his tone dropping the charm. "This deal is time-sensitive. If you care about your daughter, you'll sign. Otherwise, she misses out." Ah, there it was, the threat disguised as guilt. I smiled softly, but my voice was steady. "Don't you dare use my daughter as leverage. She is my child. Her well-being has always been my priority. And if you truly cared about her, you wouldn't be standing here, pressuring me. You'd be honest. You'd be respectful." He sat back, caught off guard by my firmness. For a moment, the room was silent except for the ticking of the clock. Finally, I stood, gathering the papers. "I'll review these with someone I trust. If they check out and if I feel it's right, I'll sign. But on my terms, not yours." His face flushed, his jaw clenched, but he couldn't argue. He needed me, and for the first time, he knew I wasn't going to be pushed. As I walked him to the door, I said calmly, "Remember this. Power doesn't come from rushing others. It comes from patience, from integrity, from respect. Maybe one day you'll learn that." I closed the door gently behind him, the folder still in my hands. And for the first time, I felt the balance truly shift. The following week, the shift in his behavior was impossible to miss. The same man who once rolled his eyes at me during family dinners now greeted me with forced politeness. He held doors, carried bags, even complimented my cooking, though I could tell the words tasted bitter in his mouth. But respect born from desperation is no respect at all. On Friday, he showed up again, this time with flowers in his hand and a smile that nearly cracked his face. "Margaret," he said, voice dripping with sweetness, "I just wanted to say thank you for everything you've done for this family. You're truly the glue that holds us all together." I raised an eyebrow, accepting the flowers but setting them on the counter without comment. "Is that so?" He cleared his throat, pulling the folder out once again. "I've been thinking, maybe I came across the wrong way before. You're not irrelevant. You're invaluable. And I'd really appreciate it if you could, help us move this forward." There it was, the flattery, laid on thick. I sat down at the table, motioning for him to do the same. Funny how quickly I went from irrelevant to invaluable when you needed me. His smile flickered, but he pressed on. "I was wrong, I'll admit it. I spoke out of turn. Please, Margaret, just one signature. That's all. You'll be helping your daughter too. This opportunity, it's life-changing." I leaned back, folding my arms. "Life-changing for who? For you or for her?" He stammered, fumbling for words. "For both of us. For the family." The cracks in his confidence were widening. I could see it in the way his hands fidgeted, the way his voice pitched higher. He wasn't just asking anymore. He was begging. "Please," he said finally, the charm stripped away, replaced by raw need. "I can't do this without you." I let the silence stretch, savoring the moment. This was the same man who had told me I no longer mattered, and now he was sitting across from me nearly on his knees, admitting the truth without even realizing it. I mattered more than he had ever imagined. I placed my hand on the folder, tapping it lightly. Respect isn't something you remember only when it's convenient. It's something you show every day, with your words, with your actions. His shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked smaller, humbled. I continued softly but firmly. "You want my signature, but before I give you anything, I need to know you understand this. I am not irrelevant. I never was. And if you ever say or act otherwise again, this door will close to you forever. Do you understand?" He swallowed hard, nodding quickly. "Yes, I understand." I slid the folder back toward him. "Then you'll wait. I'll review everything with my lawyer, and when I decide it's right, not just for you, but for my daughter, I'll sign. Until then, you'll remember who holds the pen." His eyes flickered with both relief and defeat. He nodded again, gathering his things slowly, as though the weight of his own words had finally settled on his shoulders. As he left, I watched through the window as he walked to his car. His confident stride was gone, replaced with the heavy steps of a man who had been forced to face reality. For the first time in a long while, I felt no anger, only peace, because I knew now that he would never forget the lesson. And the lesson was simple. Underestimate me once, and you'll regret it. A week later, the folder still sat on my desk. I'd gone over every page carefully, line by line, with my lawyer. There were no tricks hidden in the fine print, no traps waiting to catch me. It was legitimate. But legitimacy wasn't the only thing I cared about. Respect was. That Sunday, I invited my daughter and her husband over for dinner. The table was set, the food warm, the air thick with unspoken tension. I watched as my son-in-law squirmed in his chair, his eyes darting to the folder resting on the sideboard. We ate mostly in silence, the clinking of forks and spoons filling the void. Finally, when dessert was served, I rose and placed the folder on the table between us. "You've both been waiting for this," I said evenly, "and I've done my part. I've reviewed everything. It's solid." My daughter looked relieved. My son-in-law leaned forward eagerly, pen already in hand. "So you'll sign?" I held his gaze, letting him sit in the anticipation for a long moment. Then I said, "Yes, but on my terms." His smile froze. "Terms?" I nodded. "Simple ones. First, you will never again dismiss me to my face or behind my back. You will remember that I am part of this family, not a piece of furniture you can ignore. Second, you will treat my daughter with the respect she deserves, not just when it's convenient. And third, you will never, ever call me irrelevant again." The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. My son-in-law's face shifted from surprise to discomfort to something closer to shame. He opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again. Finally, he nodded slowly. "You have my word." I signed the papers with deliberate care, each stroke of the pen steady and sure. When I slid the folder back across the table, his shoulders sagged with relief. But the triumph he expected never came, because this wasn't his victory. It was mine. My daughter reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "Thank you, Mom," she whispered. And in her eyes, I saw it. The gratitude, the recognition that I had stood my ground not only for myself, but for her as well. As they left that night, my son-in-law paused at the door. For the first time since I'd known him, his arrogance was gone. He looked me in the eye and said quietly, "You're right. I was wrong. You're not irrelevant." I gave him a small smile. I never was. When the door closed behind them, I stood alone in the quiet house, the echo of their footsteps fading. I felt no bitterness, no gloating, just a deep, steady calm, because the truth was clear. Respect isn't demanded by shouting. It's earned through patience, through proof, through refusing to shrink when someone tries to make you small. And I had reclaimed mine. So here's what I learned. Age doesn't make you irrelevant. Experience, sacrifice, and wisdom carry a weight that no one can erase, no matter how loudly they try. My son-in-law thought I was powerless, just a woman whose time had passed. But when the moment came, the entire future he wanted depended on one thing, my signature. Respect isn't given out of convenience. It's built every day, and it should never be taken for granted. Sometimes people need to be reminded of that lesson, and sometimes the reminder comes with ink on paper and the quiet strength of patience. Tell me, have you ever been dismissed only to prove you were the one holding the real power? Share your story in the comments below. And stay tuned because there are many more tales of justice to come.